All right, so today we're diving into something truly bizarre, like genuinely strange. It's the Mothman
Right, Mothman.
of Point Pleasant. And this whole thing, it went on for about a year, a little over a year, really, from November 1966 to December of 67.
That's right.
And this small town, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, it became kind of the center of some really, really strange events. That's what we're going to try to unpack today. We're going to look at those first sightings, the really unsettling ones. And then this awful tragedy that happened and all of the different ways that people have tried to make sense of it all. Was it like some kind of sign of things to come, like a warning? Or was it just, I don't know, maybe a weird creature, but something that we could explain? Or maybe, just maybe, was it something else, like something we don't even really have words for? That's what we're going to get into today.
I think that's what makes this such an enduring story, you know? I mean, this mix of personal stories and, local accounts with a real human tragedy. And it really gets you thinking about how we deal with things that are outside of our normal experience, how we make sense of the unexplainable.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's rewind back to November 1966. Back to those first kind of spooky encounters. The one that really, put the Mothman on the map involved these two young couples. They were driving near this abandoned TNT plant just outside of Point Pleasant. So what exactly did they say they saw that night?
Well, what's really interesting is that there are these core details, like really specific things that just kept coming up again and again in those early reports. And, you got to think about how freaked out they must have been, right? So they all described this large winged being. But it wasn't just any old bird. It was more like a tall figure, almost human-shaped, but with these huge wings. Some people said they were like 10 feet across. Think about that.
10 feet? That's like almost the length of a car.
Right. It's huge.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so it was big. But what else, beyond just the size, what else was it about this thing that really stuck with people?
Well, those glowing red eyes, that's a big one. People just kept mentioning those. Like intensely bright, piercing red eyes. Really unsettling. And they also said it moved silently through the air, which is super weird if you think about something that big, right? You should be making some noise.
Yeah, you'd think so.
And maybe the most powerful detail is this. Everyone who saw it talked about this immediate, overwhelming sense of fear, like a deep, primal dread. It wasn't just being startled. It was something much deeper. Hard to just brush that off.
That's creepy. That really paints a chilling picture. Okay, so we've got these consistent details, right? But you mentioned earlier that there were some variations in what people reported. What kind of differences are we talking about?
It's more like subtle things. Like some people focus more on it standing upright like a person. Others talked more about the wings being like bat-like and how tall it seemed. Well, that probably depended on how far away they were, what angle they saw it from. But those core things, the size, the wings, the red eyes, the silent movement, and that overwhelming fear that's consistent across all of those early reports.
Wow. Okay, so let's fast forward a bit. It's a little over a year later, December 1967, and this terrible tragedy happens. The Silver Bridge collapses.
Right.
This bridge connected Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio. It collapsed right during rush hour. 46 people died. It was awful. And almost immediately, people started connecting this event to the Mothman sightings.
Yeah, this is where the whole Mothman story gets really dark. Right after the bridge collapsed, so many people started saying they had seen the creature near the bridge in the days or even weeks leading up to it. And this kind of solidified the idea that, maybe the Mothman wasn't just some weird anomaly. Maybe it was a warning, a sign of what was to come. And it's totally understandable, right? When something terrible happens, we try to make sense of it. We look for meaning. And for some people, the Mothman provided an explanation, even if it was a scary one.
Yeah, I get that. It's a powerful image, right? This mysterious figure appearing before this huge disaster. But we should probably also talk about the official explanation for the bridge collapse. What did the engineers say caused it?
Well, the official investigation was super thorough. And they basically traced the whole thing back to a structural flaw. Like there was this tiny fracture in one of the eye bars. That's a key part of the bridge's suspension system. And this one tiny crack, it set off a chain reaction. All these other parts started breaking, and boom, the whole bridge came down. It's a really technical explanation. And the important thing is the official report, it doesn't say anything about any strange creatures or supernatural forces or anything like that. Just this one tiny flaw in the metal.
So that brings us to a more skeptical view of the whole thing. Some people say that maybe the Mothman story is a case of, what do they call it, retroactive storytelling. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, sure. So retroactive storytelling is basically this. You look back at past events, especially things that were confusing or unexplained at the time, and you reinterpret them based on something big that happened later. So in the case of the Mothman, right, those sightings, they might have just seemed like weird, isolated incidents at the time. But after the bridge collapsed, they took on this whole new meaning. People started connecting dots that they might not have even noticed before. They started saying, oh, the Mothman was a warning, but maybe they only saw those connections because of the tragedy.
So the sightings were already out there, but the bridge collapse kind of gave them this darker meaning.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about the idea that maybe a lot of those sightings were just, I don't know, mass hysteria, like people freaking out and seeing things that weren't really there?
Right, so mass hysteria, or what they sometimes call mass psychogenic illness, it's a real thing. And it's actually pretty well documented. Basically, it's when a bunch of people at the same time start experiencing the same physical symptoms or having the same perceptions, but there's no real physical cause. So with the Mothman, right, maybe those early reports, all the media attention, the general sense of unease in the town, maybe that created this environment where people were just more likely to see things. They'd see a big bird or weird shadow, and their brains would go, Mothman! You know? And that just reinforced the whole belief.
Yeah, fear can definitely mess with how you see things. But then the believers, they point to this other thing. They say, look, the Mothman sightings basically stopped after the bridge collapsed. How do they explain that if it was just mass hysteria?
Yeah, that's a big point for them. They say, if the sightings were just people being scared and imagining things, why would they suddenly stop right after the disaster? It's too much of a coincidence, they say. And for them, it reinforces the idea that the Mothman was connected to the bridge somehow.
Okay, so that's a good point. And it wasn't just this winged creature that people reported, right? There was all this other weird stuff going on in Point Pleasant at the same time.
Exactly. It wasn't just the Mothman. People were seeing strange lights in the sky. You know, what we'd call UFOs today.
Oh, right.
And there were stories about creepy phone calls, like just static or maybe weird voices whispering things that didn't make sense. It created this whole atmosphere of like tension and suspicion in the town.
Yeah, that sounds unsettling. And then there were the Men in Black.
Oh yeah, the Men in Black.
What's their connection to all this?
Well, the stories about the Men in Black are super creepy. People who said they'd seen the Mothman would claim that these men would show up at their houses. They were always described as like pale and wearing these black suits, and they acted really weird, almost robotic, some people said. And these guys, they'd allegedly tried to intimidate people into keeping quiet about the Mothman. Like they'd threaten them, tell them to stop talking.
Wow. Okay, so that definitely adds a whole other layer of weirdness to the story. So, when we try to make sense of all this, we've got a whole bunch of possibilities, right? From stuff that's totally explainable to stuff that's just out there. Let's start with the more normal explanations. The one that comes up a lot is the idea that people were just misidentifying large birds. The experts on birds, the ornithologists, they've got some ideas about what it could have been.
Yeah, ornithologists have suggested that maybe people were seeing sandhill cranes or owls. Those are both pretty big birds that live in that area. And, you know, if you saw one in bad lighting or from far away, maybe you could mistake it for something weirder. Like sandhill cranes, they're tall and they've got a big wingspan. And owls, if the light hits their eyes just right, they can definitely have this creepy red eye shine.
Right, that makes sense. And there's even that other theory, the one about barn owls with fungal infections, right? That's pretty specific.
Yeah, it is. That one's not as popular. But the idea is that if a barn owl gets infected with certain types of fungus, it can make their feathers look weird, like maybe change their color or pattern so they could end up looking bigger or just distorted. And some people even think these infections could make them act strange. But, you know, that's mostly just speculation.
Right, right. But I mean, the arguments against it just being birds, they do seem pretty strong. Like when you consider how big people said this thing was and how fast it was, people said it was keeping up with cars. And that feeling of terror that everyone described, it's hard to imagine a normal bird having that kind of effect on people.
Yeah, you're right. That's the main problem with the bird theory. The size, the speed, the fear factor, it doesn't really match up with what we know about birds. So if it was a misidentification, it was a really powerful and consistent one. Like there was something more going on than just seeing a bird out of the corner of your eye.
Yeah, I see that. Okay, so now let's get into the less conventional explanations. The Harbinger of Doom theory. That's the one that really gets people's imaginations going. Like the idea that the Mothman was some kind of omen, a sign of bad things to come.
Right, the one taps into this really deep human instinct. We want to believe that there are signs, you know, especially when something terrible happens. People who believe the Mothman is a harbinger, they often point to other disasters, like Chernobyl or 9/11. They say that there were weird sightings or unusual events before those things happened too. Like maybe these entities appear as warnings, but we don't know why they do that or where they come from.
But some of the skeptics in our research, they brought up a good point, right? They said that it's easy to see patterns where there aren't any, especially after something bad has already happened. It's kind of like that retroactive storytelling thing we talked about earlier.
Yeah, that's super important to keep in mind. Our brains are wired to look for patterns. And sometimes, especially when we're emotional, we can see connections that aren't really there. We remember things that fit our beliefs,
Oh.
and we ignore things that don't. It's called confirmation bias. So, yeah, the Harbinger idea is intriguing, but we got to be careful about jumping to conclusions.
Okay, that's a good point. And then there's the really out there theory. The one about the Mothman being some kind of interdimensional being. That one was in our research too. That's getting pretty wild.
Yeah, that one really pushes the boundaries of what we normally think about.
Yeah.
The idea is that maybe the Mothman isn't from our reality at all. Like maybe it can travel between dimensions, like maybe there are rips in the fabric of space-time and it can slip through. And some of the really weird witness accounts, like people saying it seemed to disappear or move in ways that shouldn't be possible, they use those as possible evidence. But, it's all super speculative.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling, but it's also really fascinating, and maybe it could explain some of the other strange stuff that was happening in Point Pleasant, like the weird lights in the sky, that feeling that something just wasn't right.
Right. If you're open to the idea of interdimensional stuff, then maybe the Mothman's appearances and disappearances make more sense. And maybe even the way it affected people emotionally. It opens up a whole world of possibilities, even if they're just possibilities.
So after all these stories, all these theories, where does that leave us? What's the answer to the Mothman mystery?
Honestly, it's still a mystery. We have these compelling stories from people who say they saw it. We have this terrible tragedy that everyone connects it to. And we have all these possible explanations from normal stuff like birds to really weird stuff like interdimensional beings. There's no one answer that everyone agrees on.
So what do you think, our listeners, what do you make of all this? Was the Mothman a real warning that people ignored? Was it something from another dimension? Or was it just, like the skeptics say, a story that people made up, a legend that got out of control?
I think this whole case is a great example of how folklore, those stories we tell, can get mixed up with real-life tragedies. It shows how much we want to understand things, even when they're scary or strange.
Yeah, for sure. Keep looking into the Mothman story. Check out the information that's out there. Think about the different sides of the argument, and come to your own conclusions. It's a mystery that people are still talking about, even after all this time. And maybe the biggest mystery isn't what the Mothman was. Maybe it's what our fascination with these kinds of stories says about us, about how we try to make sense of the world, even when it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Thanks, everyone.